Remember the times when our parents were young, full of energy, and childhood was carefree and long, like summer evenings? In the 1970s, life seemed simpler and warmer. Every moment was filled with a special soulfulness, from family dinners to playing outside until sunset. Watch till the end, and you'll remember those forgotten, good traditions we all loved so much.
Run away to the coast.
Weekend gatherings with neighbors. Have you ever wondered why we missed the simple times of the 1970s so much? One of the key traditions of that era was regular weekend gatherings with neighbors. These weren't elaborate or pre-planned events. Everything happened naturally. I remember how on Saturdays and Sundays almost every yard had a grill going, and the smell of grilled meat filled the streets. Almost everyone had a grill, and outdoor family dinners became a tradition for all. We would just gather together and bring food, and while the kids played nearby, the adults would chat about life. It was completely normal for people to drop by without any notice. Many didn't even lock their doors, knowing that someone might simply come over. It was a time when trust and socializing with neighbors were a vital part of everyday life. Today, this simple habit has almost disappeared. We lock our doors, order food in, and rarely see people living next to us. What happened to the days when socializing was so easy? And more importantly, can this ever return to our lives? The tradition faded so quietly that many didn't even realize it was gone. Drive-in movie. When was the last time you watched a movie under the stars? In the 1970s, drive-in movie theaters were more popular than ever. Imagine this. You drive up in your car, find a spot, tune into the right radio frequency, and watch a movie right through your windshield. It wasn't just about seeing a film, it was an entire evening of entertainment with family or friends. Back then, there were over 4,000 drive-in theaters in the US, but today fewer than 300 remain. Many people fondly remember arriving with popcorn, bundling up in blankets, and watching the latest movie releases. And yes, sometimes someone would sneak into the trunk and get in for free. Those were real adventures. Now, drive-ins have almost disappeared, and with them the unique atmosphere of outdoor cinema. But what made them vanish so quickly? Up next is an even more surprising tradition from the past that has also faded. Phone conversations instead of SMS. Do you remember when people actually talked on the phone? In the 1970s, if you wanted to reach a friend, you simply dialed their number and waited for them to pick up. No texts or messaging apps, just real conversations. Most families had only one landline, often located in the living room, meaning everyone could hear your conversation. Sometimes you had to speak more quietly so your parents wouldn't overhear, especially when discussing something personal. There was no need to announce a call beforehand. People just dialed and no one considered it an intrusion. We could chat for hours about the simplest things without worrying about bothering anyone. Today, things have changed. We send brief texts, carefully choosing our words, and real phone conversations are becoming increasingly rare. Perhaps that's why we miss those times so much. But what made phone calls so important back then? And this is yet another cherished tradition of the 70s that sadly is disappearing too. Family dinners every evening. Do you remember when the whole family gathered around the table every evening? In the 1970s, dinner was more than just a meal. It was a time for connection and togetherness. The entire family would sit down and conversations would flow about everything. The day at school, work, or the latest news. On average, families spent about an hour at the dinner table with no distractions from gadgets. All the attention was on one another. No matter how busy the day had been, everyone knew that in the evening they would come together around the table. Today, many families struggle to find the time for such dinners due to hectic work schedules and fast-paced lives. We've forgotten how to slow down and enjoy time together as we used to. Maybe that's why we long for those times. Family dinners fostered an atmosphere of unity and peace that's hard to replicate today. So what else has changed since then? And why, do you think? The next forgotten tradition will definitely stir up memories. Buying milk from the local milkman. Do you remember finding fresh milk on your doorstep? Every morning, the local milkman would leave bottles of fresh milk on the porch, and many families eagerly awaited his visit. While this tradition began fading in the 1980s, in the 70s, it was still very much alive. There was no need to rush to the store. The milk came right to you. The milkmen knew their customers by name. Some even had personal conversations, asking about family news or how things were going. It wasn't just a delivery, it was a friendly exchange. Imagine how different that feels compared to today's impersonal home deliveries. Now, milkmen are a rare sight, and with them, that warm sense of community has vanished too. Ah, those were the golden days. Letters and postcards. Have you ever thought about the anticipation of waiting for a handwritten letter, opening it, and reading the heartfelt words inside? In the 1970s, letter writing was a common and cherished activity. People didn't just write to friends and family, they even wrote to movie stars or favorite music bands, hoping for a reply. Many actually sent letters to their idols, and sometimes they'd be lucky enough to receive a response. Imagine the excitement of finding a letter from a celebrity in your mailbox. Letters back then were more than just words, they were a personal connection. People would keep them, reread them over and over. It's astonishing to think that some kept dozens of letters from a single friend or loved one, building entire archives of memories. These were true treasures, incomparable to the quick texts or emails of today. Nowadays, letter writing has become almost a forgotten art. We send instant messages without much thought about what we're losing. But perhaps it's time to return to this old, meaningful form of communication. And that's not all. The next tradition from the 70s is sure to bring a smile to your face and make you wonder how we ever let it slip away. Family trips to the outdoors. Where did those simple family trips to nature go? In the 1970s, it was a real tradition. Every weekend or during school breaks, families would pack their things, load up the car, and head off to the woods, lakes, or a camping site. Most families brought tents, preferring to save money rather than staying in hotels. It was a time when vacations didn't require big expenses, and nature was the main source of fun. Kids would spend entire days running through the forest, swimming in rivers, and playing ball, often without much adult supervision. Back then, it was considered normal, and no one worried about their safety. Today, the thought of leaving kids alone for a whole day in the wild might seem terrifying. These trips created unforgettable moments, evening campfires, spooky stories, and marshmallows roasted over the flames. It was a time when families bonded without gadgets or distractions. Sunday visits to church or family gatherings. Do you remember when Sundays were a special day for the whole family? In the 1970s, many families started their mornings with a visit to church. Services often lasted more than an hour, and it was customary for everyone to attend together: children, parents, grandparents. It wasn't just a religious event, it was also a way to spend time with loved ones. After the service, there was no rush to head home. Many families hosted big lunches that could last until the evening. Relatives, neighbors, and friends would gather, and the time would pass in lively conversation and laughter. These were long, leisurely days where the focus was on connection and togetherness. Today, such gatherings are rare. Our busy schedules and fast-paced lives have distanced us from one another. And just like that, another tradition that fostered family unity has quietly faded away: collective family TV watching. Do you remember when the entire evening revolved around a single TV? In the 1970s, this was a common occurrence. Most families had only one television, and everyone would gather to watch the program that the parents had chosen. An interesting fact: no one could just switch on their tablet or head to another room, so you had to watch what was on. One of the most memorable experiences was the anticipation of a new episode of a favorite show. If you missed an episode, there was no way to re-watch it. There were no recording devices or streaming services. People waited an entire week to see their favorite characters again. These collective TV viewings created a sense of unity. Today, we rarely watch anything together, with each person glued to their own screen. How I miss those times. Up next is yet another tradition from the 70s, or rather a way of life that was once the norm. Children playing outside until dark. Do you remember what it was like to play outside until the sun went down, without a care in the world? In the 1970s, this was the norm for kids. They would leave the house for hours playing ball, riding bikes, or skateboarding, with no one watching their every move. Parents didn't worry because they knew kids would be back in time for dinner, just as they always did. Back then, children were far more independent. Many spent hours playing street games, building forts, or racing around on roller skates without any protective gear, and this was perfectly normal. These outdoor games built strong friendships and taught kids to be self-reliant. Perhaps that's something we're missing today. When we look back at the 1970s, it warms the heart. It was a time when everything seemed simpler and life was filled with moments of genuine warmth. We gathered for family dinners, played outside until dark, and eagerly awaited letters that brought joy for weeks. Our parents were young, beautiful, and full of energy, while childhood felt like a never-ending series of moments that seemed like they would last forever. What moments from the past do you miss the most?